grew up in a house, but I ain't have a home. Mama crying in the back, daddy in the zone. I'm sitting shook, staring at the wall. I wish my brother was here so he could try to walk me down the hall. I'm scared to move, I feel this way. And you wonder why I used to take the pills this way. Cause I felt the weight, and I'm manic depressive like every day a little kid. Why am I feeling this pressure? I'm in the zone now, and the vibe is reckless. It's got me walking around the house trying to find a connection. That means I'm powerless, and I ain't got the energy. That's why I ran from the past.
My name is Saxon. I'm a recovered drug addict. It's really funny to hear me say that because as a child, nobody ever believes they're gonna grow up and be addicted to drugs and alcohol. But I did, and at the age of 13 and 14, I found myself drinking, using, partying. And the fact was, I was just in a group of people that were doing it, and I always felt ostracized everywhere I went, like I was one in a group of 100. And so I can remember feeling like my shoulders were clenched and my fists were clenched. And when I took that drink and I used that marijuana, it worked. And all of a sudden, I went from feeling like an outsider to belonging. And I can remember thinking, I've got to find a way to do this every opportunity I get. And until the age of 22, that's exactly what I did. Living with parents and parental advisory, it's very hard at the age of 13 and 14 to do it every day, but you find ways over time through manipulation and dishonesty to get yourself in situations to where you could do those things. But I found myself by the age of 16 strung out like a line of clothes on opiates, on Lortabs, on pain medication, because I had got my teeth cut out from the dentist and they had given me a prescription of Lortabs, and I began to get high off of them. I began to enjoy the way that they made me feel, and so I began to manipulate the doctor to give me more and more. And that's really what started the last cycle of what would eventually bring me to my bottom and allow me to go into treatment that would eventually save my life. You know, the funny thing about drug addiction is many people look at it as someone that's a slave to drugs and alcohol, which is the case, but as I examined my life, there was so much more that I was addicted to. And there were so many other things that I tried to put in my life to make me feel okay. And one of those things were relationships. So at the age of 20, I'm strung out on pain medication. I have 2 children. So I was really lost and broken, and I really didn't have any business being a kid, having kids, but these were sort of the things that came out of a life of addiction because I was a man trying to fill a God-sized hole with everything under the sun, and it just never really worked for me. So after this, drug addiction really got far worse because I didn't have anything left to do but to spend every day getting as high as I could because of the guilt and shame of the actions that I had created that were hurting everybody around me, because the main objective of my life was me. It was always about what I want, when I wanted it, and I didn't care what I had to do to get it. And so there towards the end of my addiction, I found myself drinking liquor at 7:30 in the morning, snorting oxys and morphine by 8 in the morning, listening to country music, wanting to kill myself. And I had no hope and I had no future. And I'm living in my parents' house. My mom had left my dad because she asked him one day, it's either your son or our marriage. And my mom, or my dad, chose me. Said, after 35 years of marriage, this is my only son, you need to leave this house. And I'm feeling alone, my daddy's sitting there. You know, the worst decision my dad ever made was when he chose me over his marriage, because for the next year, he lived in torment. I can remember after I got sober, he saying, there was nights he thought that I would kill him. He couldn't even sleep because of my anger. And I can remember going out of my window. See, my dad had emphysema. He couldn't do a whole lot for himself because he was sick and he was on oxygen. And I would take and steal his car and be gone for 3 or 4 days without even knowing if he had any food. But I remember one particular morning coming home very early. I'd been out all weekend doing drugs and drinking and partying with my friends. And I came in like usual. I come in, sneak in, eat all his food and go to sleep. Well, this particular morning I walked in and my mother was sitting at the bar stool. And I can remember like it was yesterday, she looked me in my eyes and she said, I'm here to get you out of my house. And this is one of the worst emotional days I'll remember in my life. But looking back 18 years later, it was one of the first days of the rest of my life, because my mother lovingly and my father lovingly finally stood up to my addiction and did something that would force me to get help. But I can remember walking in, her saying that, and we started to tussle. We started fighting and screaming. I can remember pushing her into a closet and throwing a phone down the hallway at her. I can remember my dad wrestling me, trying to get me off of her. And I can remember vividly her breaking free, getting into a room, and I can remember her yelling, "I'm calling the law, I'm calling the law." And she had said that many times before, but this day she meant it. I can remember that day walking down Rogers Road in Pendleton, South Carolina. I remember walking down that road thinking, where am I going to go? The only thing or the people that ever had my back were my parents, and now they're done with me. And about that time, I hear a car come up and stop behind me, and it's my dad, and he said, "I'll take you wherever you want to go, but you can't stay at my house anymore." And that day, he dropped me off in 6 Mile, South Carolina, where I found myself living from couch to couch and house to house. And I can remember one particular morning waking up to the sound of urine hitting the carpet. My buddy had drank a whole liter of Evan Williams, and he had found himself in a place where he had urinated all over his pants. It had dripped from his pants to the carpet, and I woke up to the sound of this hitting the carpet. And I remember for the first time in my life thinking, you're gonna die here. Nobody's gonna remember you, and nobody's gonna know who you were except for a drug addict who never made it out. And that day I remember picking up the phone, calling my dad and saying, "I don't wanna come home, I just need help." And he came and picked me up, and that began the journey of taking me to a detox I had been to that I was skeptic of. But for the first time in my life, I wanted to go because I didn't want to die.
I ain't got the energy, that's why I ran from the...
I remember walking into that door at that detox at 22 with absolutely no idea what God was about to do. Little did I know that the next few days would get worse before they ever get better. You know that saying, like, it's always dark before the dawn. I remember those days like it was yesterday. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. The pain was tremendous. Having nightmares, I just knew I was gonna die. One of the last nights there I can remember, I'm going up here to ask this nurse for something to help me sleep, because I had been to this place a couple years prior. I showed out, they hit me with a shot, and I just remember waking up 24 hours later. So I knew they had something. So I got up out of that bed, I was pepping myself up to what to say, and I make myself walk all the way down this hall, and I get up there and I slap my hand on the desk and I look at that nurse and I say, "I'm scared of the dark." Instantly, I thought to myself, what in the world did you just say? And the nurse didn't skip a beat. He said, "Why don't you take the chair from the hallway, prop it up against the door, maybe the light from the hallway will help you." And I walked off humiliated, probably cussing myself out all the way back. But I did what he said, and that night, I just remember waking up. I slept like a baby. And that next morning, looking back, was the first day of the rest of my life, because I made a decision to further my recovery from detox and go to treatment. And so I picked up the phone and called the Owl's Nest. And I can remember like it was yesterday. Candace Adams picked up the phone and she said, "We have one bed and it's yours." I remember that day, August the 22nd of 2005, I took a step that would eventually be proven to save my life. And believe it or not, that day my dad, out of all people, came and picked me up and took me 320 miles to Florence, South Carolina, and dropped me off. And I can remember being met on the porch at that rehab by a man I didn't know, who took my bags, took me in the kitchen, made me a sandwich, took money out of his pocket, bought me a soda, and I can remember him looking me in the eyes and saying, "I love you. You may not understand that now, but one day if you stay long enough, you will." And I can tell you right now that that one statement was something that has been prominent in my life over the years, of just how the love of God met me at that rehab door when I was lost and broken, and began the journey, not by somebody telling me about him, but by him showing up through somebody to actually meet a need. And I can tell you from that day forward, I knew I was in the right place. Who would have thought that at the age of 22, God had already planned on what he would do in my life 18 years later? Today I sat in a rehab center that the Lord allowed me to create, and it's amazing how I model what we do based on how God loved me that day in 2005. To this day, every man that walks in this facility gets met, they get their bags taken, they get loved on, and they get to a place where they feel like that I can be safe and I'm in a protective environment to where I can truly be vulnerable and I can be okay with going through the process of recovering from addiction. It's really funny because now that I can tell the story from the end to the beginning, I can look back and see exactly what God was doing. And it's amazing, at my lowest and broken point of my life, God had a plan for me. And who would have thought, I never would have, 18 years later, that He would allow me and afford me the opportunity to create a space just like somebody created a space for me when I was the most broken, to come and find hope and restoration for a future. Now, 18 years later, I have been able to create a space to where men can come to the Bridge Center and be loved and be vulnerable and be okay with the process of getting put back together. You know, at 22 years old, a lot of people don't know the story, they see the glory. But the fact is, I was 22, no work history. I'd never had held a job longer than a year. I had 2 children. My dad paid for their diapers. My dad bought all their formula. I was literally had no hope and no future. And I laid in that rehab bed in August of '05, wondering how am I going to get out of this hole I've created. And so I just want to let you know that you are not too far gone. If God can pull me out of the darkness and put me on a new foundation and put a new song in my mouth, He can do it with you. God honors effort. It just takes that first step. And I promise you that God will see you through. God will do for you what you can't do for yourself. Quit believing the lies that you're too young or you're too old or you're just too far gone. Bust through that, pick up the phone, ask for help and take the first step. And I promise you, when you do that, God will show out.
And he passed me the ball, you see he calling all the plays and I don't listen to y'all. Yeah. And I'ma walk you through the word, next step is the trick. We got the message from above, this is the Exodus.